In this video, you're going to see me build an overdrive pedal. Not just some generic overdrive pedal, but a recreation of the legendary, and some might even call it mythical,
Klon Centaur.
Now, anybody that's known me for any length of time knows that I have never used distortion pedals or overdrive pedals on stage at all, even once during my entire career so far. I have owned a few that I would take to rehearsal and experiment with them, but I never used them on stage, and I've actually got a video in the works about those pedals right now. As soon as it's done, I'll link that in the description down below. And in the meantime, if you want to find out how I did get my ferocious overdrive tones on stage for many, many years, there's a link to that video down there too. Anyway, what you're going to see me build today is obviously a clone of the Klon Centaur. And I have to admit that I didn't even know anything about a clone, didn't know what it was until about a year ago. I saw there was a video, some guy was going to spend $5,000 on a guitar pedal, and it turned out to be a used clone. His name's Tyler Larson. He's got a channel called Music is Win. It's really popular. There's a link to it in the description below. Definitely check him out. So his video made me curious. It apparently made lots of other people curious as well. And suddenly I'm seeing videos about the Klon Centaur pop up everywhere. I'm seeing ads for Klon clones pop up everywhere. I went on reverb.com to check out the Centaur, and as you can see, the original pedals are outrageously expensive. So I started looking into the clones and thought about ordering one of those just to see what all the fuss was about. And then I get this email from Stuart McDonald announcing a new pedal kit, and it's called the Ghost Drive. So the Ghost Drive, according to the StewMac website, is an exact recreation of the Centaur circuit, even right down to the 1N34A germanium diodes that were used in the original. The kit was on sale for an introductory price of 99 bucks, so I thought, why not? And I ordered one, and that's what you're going to see me build today. I'm not going to go into the history of the Klon. There's tons of really good videos about that out there already. I've linked to some of them in the description. Please pop that open, the description, pop that open and check out those videos. And right now, I think we should go build a Ghost Drive. So the package came and I hacked it open, and of course everything was packaged very carefully. Very cool box that the Ghost Drive came in. Of course, there's the StewMac catalog. There's your regular paperwork, all that sort of stuff. Now let's open up the Ghost Drive. Inside, of course, you got your manual. Oh, what's that? Oh, that's a battery compartment foam and the stickers. Let's see what we got. Oh, there's our addendum. We'll talk about that later. Very detailed instruction manual, so you want to pay attention to that. The parts are packaged individually. The switches and pots and all that are in one bag. You got LED stuff in another, diodes and resistors in another, circuit breaker in another, and so on. The case is a really nice case. I don't know if it's the same size as a real Klon or not, but it doesn't matter. First thing I do is get organized. I took all the parts out and I sorted them by category. I put all the pots together, I put all the diodes together, I put all the resistors together, and so on. Then I took the manual, which has an illustrated parts list, and I photocopied that parts list. And from there, I chopped that photocopy up and I made labels for each individual part. Then I took about a gazillion little bags and I put the label in there and then found the parts that matched that label and put them in. You'll have multiples of some of the components. You just put them all together. So what I did, I put them all in a box with the first one I needed on top, last one on the bottom. First thing we're supposed to do is install 5 diodes. I'm not going to try and teach you about soldering or anything in this video. I'm just going to tell you what I did and make a couple of observations. When you put your components in, you want to bend the legs on the bottom side of the circuit board. That way, when you turn the circuit board over to solder it, your components won't fall out. Makes sense, right? Like I said, I'm not going to try and teach you how to solder or anything. This is just a cheap soldering iron I picked up because my good one needed a new tip and I couldn't find a tip for it. So go out and watch some YouTube videos on soldering, practice on something that doesn't matter, and go out and build yourself some pedals. After you solder your components in, go ahead and chop the legs off. You want to chop it really close to the circuit board, but you don't want to damage the solder joint that you just did. Step 2 is to install 31 resistors, but not all at once. I recommend putting 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 in if they're not close together. And you'll see here I'm using my hemostats to pull the resistors down close to the circuit board. I didn't get the bends quite where they needed to be on the legs of the resistors. So use some needle nose pliers or hemostats or something like that and pull it in close to the circuit board. There's 31 of these buggers. You'll notice I'm checking the value on each of the resistors after I take it out of the package and before I put it into the circuit board. I also checked it before I packaged them. It's better to be careful. The circuit board is labeled very clearly as well, so you shouldn't have any problems with any of this as long as you follow the instructions. I recommend reading through the instruction book all the way before you even start to get organized and separate out your parts. Just read through it, and that'll help you a whole lot when you're going and you're finally building your pedal. So I soldered like a madman for a while. I don't know what I'm doing here. Oh, I'm apparently chopping the legs off of the resistors off camera, and now I'm back on camera. Lots of legs, clean up. Notice I left my circuit board in the frame. I did that for a couple of reasons. One, so that the little alligator clip things wouldn't damage any of the traces. And when we go to solder what they call a breakout board to the main board, it's a whole lot easier if they're both in this frame. You can break it out after you've soldered those two sections together. You'll see that in a few minutes. So sometime around this point, I took a break from soldering and threw a coat of paint on the enclosure so that it would be ready for the step where we install the potentiometers onto the circuit board. And again, don't put too many of them on the board at once. If you're new to this, do 1 or 2 at a time. Give yourself plenty of room for the soldering. It's not a race. You'll be happy that you did it that way. I think we need to hear some of my music while we watch me solder. Look how small that resistor is. Isn't that incredible? All the components in this are very, very small. Some of those magnifiers when I'm doing this work so that I can make sure my solder joints are good and I'm not splattering solder all over creation. I had to do this project in about 12 sessions, I think, because I lead a very busy life, and unfortunately I wasn't able to just sit down and do this all in one sitting. I'm not entirely sure that you would want to do it all in one sitting. You could very easily do this build over one weekend if you wanted to. So, next step, we're going to install 11 capacitors. Now, this is where there is a mistake in the StewMac manual. The very first thing you're going to do is put 7 1 microfarad resistors in, and they're indicated by this orange line right here. And the capacitors are indicated by the dark circle. But you'll notice at this end of the orange line that there's an orange line going to nothing. There's no indication of the capacitor. but it does show you where it goes. So again, if you look at the circuit board and you make sure that you read the values on the circuit board, you should be fine. Follow the instructions carefully and just think everything through. Now the capacitors have the legs taped. It's miserable getting the stuff off. You get the tape off and then it leaves gunk like this, and then you think you've got it clean and you're ready to solder, but then there's still adhesive on it like this. You want to take the time to clean that adhesive off, whatever you use, adhesive, Goo Gone, or something like that. Whatever, just get it clean so that you don't have a bad solder joint. So those capacitors have a positive leg and a negative leg. The positive leg is the longer wire coming out of the bottom of it, and that goes into the square hole. And you just want to pay attention to that. Not all capacitors are polarized, but some are. If one leg is longer, it's polarized. So pay attention to that. Make sure you get them into the circuit board with the polarity lined up correctly. Notice I'm checking off each step as I go. I highly recommend that. I think that's a good practice. That way, if you have to break it up into multiple sessions, then you know where you left off. That's a very small capacitor. It's not polarized. It's got very short legs, kind of like that one. And I had to use tape to hold them in place so they wouldn't fall when I turned it over. It really doesn't matter which way you put those in. However, StewMac recommends putting them in with the print side all facing the same direction. They all have their value printed on one side. So that's what I did. I just picked a direction and went with it. So the next thing is to install the IC sockets and the chips. Obviously, you don't want to put the chip in until you've put the socket in. Pay attention to how the socket lines up. That's important. Again, all this is laid out in the StewMac instruction manual, and it's very clear. Just pay attention. After your solder's cooled off, you can put the chip in. The next step, which is cutting and installing 12 lead wires. There's two different lengths. Just cut them all the length. You want to strip about 1/8 of an inch off of each end on these. They give you plenty of wire, so don't worry if you make your leads a little bit long. Go ahead and put the wires in and bend it over like you did with the legs on the resistor. Solder all of them into place. This is where having the circuit board and the breakout board still in the frame comes in really handy, because you're soldering those two together right here, and not having to worry about them flopping around on the workbench is kind of helpful. So now you're going to prepare the potentiometers, the pots as we call them, to be soldered into the board, and for that you're going to actually be putting them on the outside of your case. So I protected it with some painter's tape. It does matter which potentiometer goes where, so pay attention to that. You use the washer and the nut to screw them in place. And once you've done that, then you put your circuit board on. I use a little pair of pliers there to keep the circuit board even, level. And solder the legs on your potentiometers. Then you can take the nuts and washers off, pull that out, and you're ready for the next step. Installing the switch and the LED into the housing. The LED does have a positive and negative leg, so pay attention to that in the instructions. You also want to pay attention to aligning the foot switch correctly inside the housing, because After these are in, you're going to put the circuit board in and you're going to solder everything into place. Before you put the circuit board in, I recommend installing your battery clip if you're going to use one. You don't have to on this, but I put one in just in case because you never know. First thing you want to line up is the legs on the LED. You can see that's what I'm doing right here. That's why I went back to real time. You want to make sure that you've got them both in the circuit board before you press it down. And once the LED legs are in, then you can press the potentiometers through their holes and the switch legs through their holes on the breakout board. Want to be careful there. The nuts for the pots are not all the same size, so pay attention to that. Do more soldering, and then you're ready to put the input, output, and power jacks in. This is where the addendum comes in. The original manual, which may be corrected by the time you see this video, had some mistakes in it. Make sure you look at the addendum and pay close attention to that and follow that. It's not a big deal. It's really easy if you just pay close attention. You see I'm using my hemostats as a gigantic heat sink basically, so that the insulation on the wires doesn't melt too far back. There are smaller clips that you can use as heat sinks. I'm kind of going through and making sure that all the nuts really are tight. Should have done that before. Put the knobs on. Oh, we're almost there, people. Put the back on. Tighten everything up. And boom, you've got yourself a Klon clone. You have just built yourself a ghost drive. Or maybe you didn't. I did, and you just watched. Let's see what this thing sounds like. Before I hooked it up, I decided to go ahead and put some of the stickers on it. Everyone knows that the cooler a pedal looks, the better it sounds, right? I got the build done, got the stickers on. I plugged it in the other day, and what you're going to see is the highlights from that. Legend has it that the Klon Centaur was designed to be played through the front end of a Fender twin reverb amp. I don't have a Fender twin reverb, so what we're going to do is use the clean channel on my Carbon V3. That's got a pretty similar sound to a Fender. We're going to run that through my vintage Marshall 412 cabinet. I'm not going to use any mics or preamps or anything to record this. I'm just going to use the mics that are on the two cameras. One camera will be on me, the other camera will be on the pedal itself, and I'm going to run those two audio tracks back in stereo for you. So I'm using my Ibanez RG with a couple of humbuckers in there. It's also set up so that I can get a single coil sound. First couple of things I'm going to play here is a little early AC/DC riff, and you can tell that there's a tiny bit of hair on that clean channel. I got it pushed a little bit hard, but when I go to the single coil sound, you'll hear that sounds really clean, sounds good for funk type stuff. As you can tell from the AC/DC riff, the clean tone from the amp, the unaffected tone from the amp is really not suitable for hard rock. Sounds okay for funk. I'm about to step on the foot switch, and my expectations are honestly not that high. I think so many YouTubers have gushed about how there's this magical tone in the Klon that my personal opinion is that there's no pedal that can possibly be that good, that will just take my breath away. So let's see what happens when I step on that switch and we engage the pedal. first impressions, not too bad, actually. When I stepped on the switch and engaged the pedal in the single coil mode, it definitely put some hair on that. And I can totally hear that tone being used for a lot of blues players, blues sound. And then when I switched to the humbucker with a higher output, it took us into some what I would call classic rock territory. But when I did those couple of chords that sounded like they were from a Who song, that totally worked. And I have to say that my first impression was not too bad. So in typical Clark fashion, what's the first thing I do? I reach down and I crank the gain. Let's see how this sounds. Push the output up a little bit too. So, yeah, for classic rock, it totally works. It sounded pretty good on that ZZ Top riff and on that Nugent riff. Probably not high enough gain for my tastes, but as you could tell from my surprised after I played the ZZ Top riff, I think it sounds pretty good. It's pretty natural sounding. Let's see what happens next. All right, so what's happening now is I've gone to a medium gain channel on the amp, a mildly overdriven channel, and I've pulled the gain back on the pedal back to around the noon position. This video is starting to get long, so we're just going to hammer through these next couple of riffs. You can see what I'm doing on screen. We'll do a wrap up here in just a minute. All right, so here's my initial assessment of the StewMac Ghost Drive, which, as mentioned, is a reproduction of the Klon Centaur circuit. Does it sound just like a Klon? I have no idea. I don't own a Klon. I haven't got $8,000 to spend on one either, so I can't answer that question for you. Does it sound good? It actually does. It's an overdrive pedal. It's not a distortion pedal. I think it's got very amp-like qualities. When I was doing that Van Halen riff, it cleaned up real nice when I rolled the volume back. When I dug in again, it had some bite to it, had spark. The pedal's not designed to be a metal machine, but if you slam the front end of an already mildly distorted amp with the gain all the way up and the volume all the way up on this pedal, you can get into metal territory. You'd be able to pull this off in a cover band. You'd be able to do everything from 38 Special to Metallica. I can totally see myself putting this on my board. We're going to have to do another video, and we're going to have to do a deep dive on this pedal. Try to find its full potential. We'll try some pedal stacking. We'll play around with the amp EQ. We'll play around with the EQ on the Ghost Drive. But yeah, it's a good pedal. And this comes from a guy who's not usually very fond of overdrive and distortion pedals. So if you've got an itch to have a Klon clone and you like building stuff yourself, this is totally worth it. Go to StewMac.com. They're not sponsoring this video at all, but yeah, go to StewMac.com and you can pick one up. Sometimes they're on sale for 99 bucks. Usually they're like 130 or so. Well worth the price. That's where we're at. Till next time, live well and rock hard.